Greetings to my fellow peace blunderers, and today I'm starting a new series where I'm going to analyze some of the brilliant games of the past. Doesn't matter if they were played 2 years ago or 200 years ago. Now, some of you might argue that it's only fitting if I start this series with something like, I don't know, the Oprah game, for example, which is a classic, but come on, it's like literally everywhere on the internet. Even my dead hamster probably reviewed it at some point. I've decided to go back in time even further, 3 years before Paul Morphy was even born, to 1834, and look at the match played between arguably two of the best players in the world at the time. Alexander McDonnell from Ireland, sorry for that, as white, and Louis-Charles de la Bourdonnais from France as black. This game will have everything. We'll have a sharp Sicilian, monstrous central pawns, rooks and queens hanging galore, pawns on the 7th ranks, forced mates, you name it. So like I said, we're going all the way back to 1834, and it was a curious time in chess history. Paul Morphy, of course, isn't alive yet, and interestingly enough, for a lot of people, Paul Morphy is this like oldest point of reference, if you see what I mean. If you ask people, okay, so you probably heard of Paul Morphy, do you know of any other player that was prominent and it came before him? A lot of people would struggle to answer that question, although I'm pretty sure that most of you guys know at least one player that came before Paul Morphy, you just don't realize it. So in the late 18th century, even before these guys came around that we're going to talk about, in the 1770s, 1780s, 1790s, probably the best player in the world, and the guy that you heard of, is the Philidor. Of course, you heard of him because of the Philidor defense, and, well, probably the Philidor position in the endgame as well. And after Philidor died, but before these two were able to reach their peak, the chess world was dominated for a little bit by another player from France called Alexander Deschapelles, but after he passed, well, these two took the cake. The question is, which one of them is the better player? Which one of them is that best player in the world that you probably never heard of? And since we're looking at the game from Black's perspective, some of you might have guessed that it is La Bourdonnais that is going to claim that title. Yeah, as we're looking at the game from his point of view. This game is game number 16 in match number 4 between the players as they were battling it out to figure out who indeed was the better one. And it was kind of hard, really, at the time, as you could guess, to figure out who the world chess champion is, because there wasn't really such a thing as a world chess champion. FIDE wouldn't exist for at least a century. And this is what people did. People were like, okay, you look strong, you have a reputation of a strong player, let's play some matches, see who's better. The matches were played on neutral ground, not in Ireland, not in France, but in England, in London, at the Westminster Chess Club, with the owner of the club notating the games for posterity. And boy, a good thing that he did. The matches were spanning from June to October of 1834, basically a 5-month period. And funnily enough, the matches never officially concluded. And yes, you could say La Bourdonnais had amassed a quite healthy lead by that point. You could say that even though the matches never really finished, well, he was by far the stronger player. But the funny thing is the reason why they never finished. La Bourdonnais was in serious financial trouble. He had a lot of debt. And at some point in October, he had to run away from London as quick as possible to come back to his motherland, France, and deal with that debt with his creditors. And unfortunately, this would prove to be the last time they would ever play. They would never come back to finish the matches because, tragically, Alexander McDonnell passed a year after, very soon afterwards, in 1835. Of a kidney disease, which is called nephritis. And La Bourdonnais would also die quite soon afterwards in 1840. He died absolutely penniless, so much debt he had. And another fun fact, just before we start, when La Bourdonnais died in 1840, it was arranged so that he would be buried pretty much next to McDonnell's grave, in the same cemetery, a stone's throw distance between the graves. So yeah, I hope I enlightened you a little bit there, and yeah, let's get into the game. Finally, McDonnell starts with e4. Some classics never change. E4 is absolutely timeless and will be forever in our hearts. And Bourdonnais responds with c5. And this is one of the earliest recorded prominent games featuring the Sicilian. And again, c5, the Sicilian, you could say, is also timeless. And the first couple of moves are basically going to be open Sicilian with knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d, knight takes d. Something we see a lot of even now. And this is where the game is about to take a slightly unorthodox turn, but you would expect that from a game of this age. Bourdonnais played e5, a move that is still played today, although not the most popular. As far as I can tell from the database, it is the 4th most popular one. The next move is going to be even more unorthodox, however, as knight takes knight on c6. And when Harry Kasparov reviewed this game, by the way, he's a big fan of this game, alright? When he reviewed this in his My Great Predecessors book, he said that these days, every kid knows that in this position you play knight b5, and it is the main theoretical line, and it is the best move. What White basically did is that he played a 1 knight move, 2 knight moves, which is, still okay because it's what you do with your knight in the open Sicilian, so it's not the problem in and of itself. But then they play a move number 3 with the knight just to exchange it off for the knight on c6. It doesn't make much sense. If you're going to make a 3rd knight move, just move it to a better square, that is b5. And on top of that, when b takes c6, which is the better recapture compared to d takes c6, because if d takes c6, the white is going to just take the queen and, relinquish black of their castling rights. With b takes c6, we're taking closer to the center, and this pawn is, of course, helping to control d5. And here, I should also mention that when I analyzed this game with the chess.com game review system on depth 30, by the way, not depth 18, none of that nonsense, this is too little. On depth 30, boy, you're not going to be happy with this game's accuracy. McDonnell, according to the game review, played with 73 accuracy, which is probably not impressive enough for most of you. And Bourdonnais also had some more, unimpressive game accuracy of 84. But then again, I should also say that this is 1834 we're talking about. Chess is still pretty much a game of selected few, and it's more of a fun pastime than anything else. No one is really that much studious about the game. They just, play to have fun and to win some money, maybe if they're playing for money. And this is why I think those brilliant moves played at the time and brilliant sequences of moves deserve all the more praise. You just got to understand the circumstances surrounding that time and surrounding the knowledge of chess that existed at the time. Anyway, so now we have bishop c4, which is an okay move, but the engine prefers bishop to d3. Because from c4 actually is going to be quite relevant later. The bishop can be threatened by d5 if it ever happens, and if it is ever allowed. So the bishop will have to retreat to b3, and it probably can be harassed by a5, a4. So you've got to be careful. This move is still okay though. Now black responds with knight to f6, which is the best move, and white plays bishop g5, which is far from the best move. Now, in my opinion, which, take it for what it's worth, there is not much wrong with this move in isolation. This is a quite intuitive move to make, and in and of itself, it's not particularly terrible. It's just that this move serves as a precursor to what happens next, which wouldn't be very good for white. Just check this out. So bishop b7, unpinning the knight and protecting it some more, and now queen to e2. Now, this is probably the first serious inaccuracy that white makes, because maybe queen to e2 is a slight development move, I guess, looking at the king, but the king is about to castle anyway. The problem with queen e2 is that it no longer watches over d5. As long as the queen was on d5, let's just say we castle instead, and black plays d5 now, which, is not a good move. with the queen still being on d1, because we can just capture the knight first, and then after the recapture happens, we can just capture e takes d, c takes d, bishop takes d5, and we're basically pawn up. White is much better here with about +1. So the queen was providing sufficient control over d5. On a2, it cannot do that, and that is why black responds with d5, going straight for the throat. And black has now built a marvelous center as early as move 8, not only equalizing but also even gaining a slight edge. And the next move by white, by McDonnell, is a move that Kasparov doesn't like either, and many other people don't like, the ones who have analyzed this game before, is bishop takes f6. Remember I told you that bishop g5 probably just about okay in isolation, but bishop g5 enables you to take on f6 at some point, which did happen. And the idea behind white's move here is probably when bishop retakes, is that with the knight gone from f6, it slightly weakens black's control over the key central squares such as e4 and d5. And whilst it is correct, unfortunately it's a little bit too late, because even without the knight, black has got complete control, and it's not like this pawn has been severely weakened. It's still sufficiently protected. Mind you, it's still sufficiently protected only because the queen stepped away from d1 to e2, which is a funny lesson to all of us. Sometimes these developmental moves with the queen from d1 to e2 are very useful, right? Sometimes the queen does sit better on the e-file, and we can maybe even castle queenside if we so wish. Also, queen d1 to e2 is a very Smith-Morra-like move, so I know better than a lot of people how useful this move can be. However, when you're trying to stop your opponent from building the center, you've got to think twice before playing something like queen e2. And remember when I told you that a bishop c4, although again, there was nothing really wrong with bishop c4, the engine still preferred bishop g3 a couple of moves earlier because of what just happened. Now the bishop is attacked, and you've got to do something about that. So white decided to retreat it to b3. However, it looks like bishop b3 again is the wrong idea. Again, the engine is recommending bishop d3 because after castles, black plays a5, which is a very interesting multifunctional move, and a move that I recommend you guys to always look for when there is either a bishop on b3 or maybe even better, a queen on b3. After a5, black is about minus 0.5 already, and this move contains a double threat. First of all, after a4, you've got to ask questions of that b3 bishop. If white did allow us to play a4 unpunished, this bishop is going to get trapped and captured. Another threat is bishop a6, skewering both queen and rook. So as you can see, a5, very cool move. Now, interestingly enough, the engine suggests a very clever move, rook to d1, which kind of handles both threats very nicely. If we look now at bishop a6, of course, it's not that big of an issue because the rook is not there on f1 anymore, it's d1, and the skewer is not possible. At the same time, if you're like, oh, I can just play a4 and trap the bishop just like I intended. Well, you're not really trapping the bishop because bishop can now go to c4. You see how that pawn is pinned to your queen, so you can't really capture the bishop. You can, but it will come at the cost of losing your queen. So I guess another takeaway from this position is that when faced with serious trouble, always try to look for some clever solution, something that your opponent might have not seen, might have missed, something that is not exactly straightforward. Never give up. Sometimes in the situations where it looks like you're on the verge of losing material, it's not always that simple. You can find that clever move. And McDonnell kind of saw this idea, but not really. You see, he did play rook g1, but not for the same reason I just explained to you. Before playing rook d1, he took with e takes d, and after c takes d, only then he played rook d1. And if you play a4 now, there is no need for bishop c4. There is no need for this tactical trick because we can just take on d5. This pawn is not sufficiently defended anymore after these pawn exchanges in the center. And of course, with the rook now being on d1 and the bishop still being on b3, they're both attacking this pawn on d5 that is only protected by the queen for now, which means that the pawn is in danger. Something has to be done about it, otherwise it's going to get captured. Of course, Bourdonnais saw a problem coming and he played d4. And at this point, well, you've got to be really happy for black, right? Black has built a quite nice center, constricted white pieces somewhat, and from this point on, the game is about to go wild. The recommended engine move here is knight d2, but at first glance it looks kind of underwhelming. You know, what the hell is that? Bloody boring. Knight d2. Yeah, it develops a piece. It's sound. It's trying to unblock yourself, I guess, a little bit at some point, but it's 1834 we're talking about, and it's McDonnell we're talking about. Nah, son, we're going to go for the win. We don't care. Positional, slow chess. He played the move, which probably most of you would never even consider because it looks kind of outrageous, but yeah, he played c4, and this is just a crazy move, and this is a move that says, I am going to just go for it. I don't care. I don't believe that your pawn is going to be strong enough. I'm going to blockade it, whereas I'm going to use my c-pawn and I'm going to try and promote that one. Now, objectively, this is a mistake, of course, but psychologically, you could completely understand someone like McDonnell probably playing against the better player, and he realizes that he's playing a better player because by now they've played a lot of matches, and McDonnell could sense that he's being outplayed sort of strategically, and he's playing white, and he's supposed to be a tempo up at least, and he wants a bit of counterplay. He wants to get things active, and he does through c4. Boy, definitely he does. No en passant, please, of course, because that will be quite bad, to say the least. So we're not going to do that. But black is otherwise still happy with this move because, as I said, the center that black has got just got stronger. Look at this passed pawn. Le Bourdonnais is like, all right, I'm going to play queen b6. So on b6, the queen is stopping c5, at least momentarily. The queen gets away from the rook just in case, and is still protecting d4. So I guess at the end of the day, it is a quite sensible move. Now, bishop to c2, which is also a relatively decent move. It does not hang the pawn on b2, just if you're curious, because if that were to happen, Le Bourdonnais would not be happy with the outcome of the game, because bang, we've got a check on h7, and we've got a discovered attack on the queen, and the queen is going to drop. So no taking that poison pawn, please. And now black responds with bishop b7. It's a decent move. It's not the best, but I'd say it's very characteristic of how people used to play chess at the time. And this is why I strongly recommend you, if you're just starting out, go ahead and look at these historical games 100 years ago, 200 years ago, because although these are the strongest players in the world, their patterns, their ideas were far simpler than of the strongest players in the world today. Of course, if you are an 800 and if you're analyzing the games played by Carlsen versus MVL, it's unlikely to do you much good because these strategies are just far beyond your understanding. You're just out of your league. Whereas analyzing the games of these fellas, it's quite easy to understand. The ideas are going to be simplistic and basic. What is the most basic idea behind bishop to b7? Well, it's developing a bishop a little bit, of course, connecting the rooks. It's always nice. Second of all, you can say that the bishop is looking at g2, maybe creating some sort of mating thread at some point. Why not? I'll take that. But I think the original idea behind bishop b7 was that we want to prepare the e4 push at some point. You see, if e4 was ever played, we've got d4 supported by bishop and queen already. e4, however, was not supported much. And even after bishop b7, it's not enough, is it? We've got two attackers on e4 and only one defender, even with the bishop. So if h3 happened, e4 isn't really possible. The bishop just takes. It does not have sufficient protection. And this is why after bishop b7, we will have a bit of a tussle for the e4 square, because now we have knight d2, adding a third attacker to that e4 square. And McDonnell, to give him credit, he's really trying to constrict black as much as possible, closing down d3, closing down e4, and that's what he's trying to do. And now rook a to e8, putting another supporter of the e4 push yet again. And in this position, McDonnell made another quite serious mistake, and a mistake I believe most of you guys can relate to, myself included. Sometimes we play moves because they look nice. We put a nice piece onto a nice square and it's going to be just all nice. That was a terrible parody, sorry. But he played knight e4 and you think, wow, nice. Central knight attacking the bishop on f6. The knight is defended, blocking any advance of e4. d3 still not possible. And if you so wish, we can now play c5 as well, because c5 will be supported by this knight. And what else is there to wish? It's a brilliant knight. However, what happens sometimes when you play these kind of moves, when you put these pieces in the center, on the 4th, on the 5th ranks, sometimes they can get harassed. But we'll get to that, because after bishop to d8, you can probably see the idea that Bourdonnais had in his mind. And it's very good, by the way, that he played rook a to e8 as opposed to, I don't know, rook a to d8 or rook f to e8, because if we look back, a couple of moves back, my personal instinct, I'll be honest, would be to put the rooks behind the pawns, right? And it's also, a decent idea. There's nothing wrong with that. But when choosing where to put his rooks, Bourdonnais decided he would rather have them on the E file and on the F file, rather than behind the pawns on the D and on the E file. Because after what happened here, we can now see that this rook is going to be of massive help when we push for F5 to get this knight away from that dreaded e4 square. However, we're jumping a little bit too far. Let's not discount McDonnell just yet, because he plays c5, attacking the queen and trying to promote that pawn. McDonnell is not giving up on the idea of winning this game by no means. The queen goes back to c6, and this battery is now looking quite scary. Again, another reason why bishop b7 could be quite helpful. This knight, if it happens to go somewhere, will lead to just getting mated. So McDonnell has to be really careful. And of course, he saw that. That's why he played f3, supporting the knight, but more so, should the knight go away from that square, the mate is not possible. The f-pawn is covering it. However, by solving one problem, he kind of created another one that will bite him in the backside. At the same time, Bourdonnais be rubbing his hands like this because with c5, what's that? What is it doing now? It's so weak. Bishop e7, which is the engine's best move, attacking that pawn twice. Bourdonnais is looking to prove that this daring attempt by McDonnell is very unsound. And McDonnell's like, okay. To his credit, he's just chilling, rook a to c1, protecting that pawn indirectly, and it is the engine's best move. This pawn cannot really be captured, because if bishop takes, let's just do that. I don't really favor black's chances anymore, because after knight takes, we just took a free piece. Cannot really recapture with the queen, because if queen does decide to capture, bang! Bishop takes h7 with check, and we have another discovered attack on the queen, just like we had a couple of moves ago if queen took on b2, if you remember. So no. And again, Bourdonnais is like, okay, son, you have stopped one of my plans. I've got another one, f5. Remember that? Remember how I put the rook there and there so I can play f5 and dislodge your knight? There you go. A very direct, aggressive way of approaching this by Bourdonnais. And again, very typical of that time. We're looking at very direct confrontational chess positions where pieces get developed very swiftly. pawns are flying forward. And sometimes it's not the best thing to do. And especially when you're pushing your f-pawn, you've always got to make sure that this diagonal cannot be exposed. And McDonnell does deliver this queen c4 check, but black is still okay. The most important thing is that he now tucks his king away safely to h8, which he did. Any other move, actually, in this position makes it equal, even favorable for white. So if trying to block with a queen, but really it kind of looks counterintuitive. I wouldn't expect most of you guys to block with a queen. I think most of you would have done just what Bourdonnais did, just put it on h8. But if queen goes to d5 blocking, yeah, it's not very optimal. Bishop b3, pressuring this diagonal even more, and the queen exchange is pretty much forced. And after this exchange, actually the engine is favoring white. It feels like black has overextended a little bit too much, and white is about to actually make this c-pawn work. So yeah, again, king h8, but some of you may be like, wait a minute. Okay, you said king h8 is such a great, obvious move to fight, but doesn't it hang bishop a4 with a skewer? Bloody hell. My god, and if I have to move my queen away, say c7, not only do I lose a rook, this pawn is now unblocked on c5. It's looking really scary. Like, what the hell have we done there? Take a breath. It's fine. After bishop a4, which was indeed played on the board, McDonnell probably thought that he had it. Probably thought that he finally had it. He finally generated some counterplay. But Bourdonnais is like, no, I don't care. Queen h6, which is the only move that wins for black here, the only one. All the other hand the advantage to white immediately. Very good find. Because we played f3 as white, this diagonal is exposed. And yet again, I'm talking about when you push your f-pawn, always look for potential risks along that diagonal, whether or not it can get exposed. A very clever find by Bourdonnais here. Again, when in trouble, when faced with these sort of things, skewers and pins and whatnot, forks, checks, always look for inventive ways of getting out of that trouble. After queen h6, don't forget, this knight is still hanging, and it does look like the king side is about to explode. And with the bishop pair, with this bishop already staring at this diagonal, with our rooks mostly directed at the king side, if the king side were to blast open, there would only be one winner. Now, McDonnell is like, knight, schmight, whatever, I don't care. Bishop takes rook on e8, you've got to at least have an exchange for your troubles, I suppose. And after pawn takes knight, again, white is an exchange up, took a rook for a knight. And McDonnell, to his credit, again, I want to give him a lot of credit, although he's going to, well, lose the game, spoiler alert. He is not folding like a torn accordion. He is going for it. Don't care about saving my bishop. I go c6. I am pushing that guy forward relentlessly. I don't care at all. This center doesn't faze me. I want to promote that pawn. And, you know, there is a lot of defense on that pawn. You can't argue with that. And interestingly enough, c6 in this position is the best move. So good find. And now let's reassess the situation very quickly. We have a monster of a pawn on c6, and let's call it what it is. It is a monster already. When it was on c4, we were laughing at it. When it's already on c6, supported in this kind of manner, it's laughing at us. The bishop is hanging, and, you know, it's looking scary for black. However, this move and some moves before that, like with queen h6, and with some moves that are going to be after that, Bourdonnais keeps finding these only moves. You know, there aren't many moves that are winning here for black, but he just keeps doing that time and time again, proving that he's not just some amateur, proving that he does require a bit of respect. He does demand that respect. Now, disregarding the bishop completely, I don't know, how many of you guys would have done that, but now he plays e takes f3. Again, very good vision, because if pawn takes, let's assume the pawn takes, queen e3 check is going to be mate in 5, because no matter where the king goes, we're just going to, let's say king goes to h1, f takes on g2, and then when king takes, this is just too much for the white king. It's about to get mated. So, can't really capture the bishop, McDonnell, right? Has to deal with the king threat. And McDonnell does deal with that threat brilliantly and terribly at the same time. And you're about to find out what I mean. He played rook c2, which is the engine's best move, and it's a very good find. Yet again, we are seeing how these players are finding very good moves in very difficult positions. But then again, in some positions, they just blunder terribly. But let's not talk about that. And when queen e3 check does get played on the board, shockingly, rook f2 is a draw for white. And that is why rook c2 was such a brilliant find, because rook f2 is so important. And this is such a crazy position. It's hard to make sense of it at all. If rook f2, well, you still got this hanging, you've got this hanging, you've got this under attack. This is wild. But realistically, if we look at this position, black, what does he have anymore after rook f2? If f takes g2, queen just goes to e2, and everything seems like very well interdefended. Very well interdefended. So if you're like, okay, I can just take this hanging bishop, c takes b7 in response. And the material is equal, but this pawn is really weak, and this pawn has to be dealt with in one way or another. If we go rook b8, for example, a very simple queen takes c3, pawn takes c3, and something like rook to c2. Just look at this position. White has got a pair of rooks, black has got a ton of weaknesses, and this is just going to be a very, very, very easy win for white. And the engine agrees it gives white like plus 17. So after rook f2, it's very easy to go wrong trying to play for a win for black. But then again, remember when I told you that when McDonnell found rook to c2, he dealt with the threat both brilliantly and terribly? Well, you're gonna be in disbelief. But after rook e3 check, and after playing rook c2, which you would think lead to rook f2, McDonnell never played it. Never played it. He played king h1, and this is now back in black's favor. It's kind of weird that she would play rook c2 but not follow it up with rook f2. But again, try to understand why king h1 is worse than rook f2 for a very simple reason. King h1, first of all, it's in the corner, and there is a big difference between this king being in the corner, all safe and sound, and this king being in the corner, not safe and sound, because there is a lot of stuff happening. Remember this bishop, by the way, just in case. Maybe it will not get captured. If it doesn't, it's going to be a threat. So on h1, the king isn't only not safe, but also it doesn't really have any say in a position anymore. From g1, it could at least somewhat help in taming this f-pawn, maybe even some of the other pawns. But in the corner, it's just going to stay there and wait to get mated. So Bourdonnais is like, nah, okay, fine. My bishop has been hanging for long enough. Okay, so I'm going to go back to c8, and it's a very decent move. We're saving the bishop, of course, but we're also blocking that pawn from promotion. It's blocking the promotion square, which is really handy. Bishop d7, the best move by McDonnell, trying to save his own bishop and trying to fight for that promotion square. Very, very sensible, but sadly, this pawn looked very scary, and it still kind of is scary, but Bourdonnais got 3 of them. Bourdonnais got 3 of them, and they're all going forward. F2. And slowly but surely, McDonnell is running out of options. There are a lot of threats looming in the air. For example, if white decides to ignore f2 completely and play something like Bishop takes c8, for example, which is a nothing move. Queen e1, check. And this is going to be a disaster for white. Of course, if rook takes, it's going to be a very straightforward mate in 1. Well, mate in 2 after queen blocks, of course. So not good enough. And if queen blocks, which is a more resistant move, we've got a brilliant queen takes rook on d1. And it is the same idea. The queen cannot really recapture. It's going to be the same kind of mate. Promote and then mate. This is just awesome. So this pawn probably has to be blocked. And not only blocked, it also has to be dealt in a way so that the rook is not really hanging. You see how the rook on d1 is hanging? If we go rook f1, like so, it at least is not hanging anymore. And now threats like queen e1 don't really work because it doesn't come with check. And we can very, very easily just take on f2, for example, with the rook. We take the pawn on f2 and black has got nothing. Black has got nothing. What is black supposed to do? If rook takes rook, we just take the queen. Thank you very much. So no attack at all. We have to be very careful. And here, Bourdonnais got the only move. Again, keeps finding the only moves for most of the time. This queen e3 check was a bit premature in e3, but apart from that, very brilliantly played. d3, moving, pushing the pawns forward. Remember, we've got 3 of them. We've got to keep it moving. We've got to push it forward. We don't care about this pawn because it does look like it's pretty much covered. The rook, just in case, is defending that. So, that's safe and sound. So we're just going to focus on our goals, right? And of course, we didn't just move the pawn forward, we also attacked that rook, which has to be dealt with in one way or another. Funnily enough, the best move in this position is actually just forget about this rook and take on c8. And again, this is just bonkers. This position is complete bonkers. It's hard to make sense of it. Anyone would struggle here. And now, after pawn takes, we're just bringing the bishop back to a6, and we are trying to secure that promotion square as much as we could. The black is still winning, but it's a bit of a struggle here because the 2 pawns that are the most far advanced are kind of stopped, for now, at least. And white did manage to unblock the white pawn. However, this is not what McDonnell played. McDonnell played, and I'm not blaming McDonnell here for not finding bishop takes c8 and then bishop a6. McDonnell saw a rook being attacked and he addressed it with rook to c3, attacking that pawn twice and also pinning that pawn. Of course, the rook will be attacking the queen if the pawn moved forward ever. And now, what would your instinctive move be? Now that this pawn is pinned, you would be like, okay, probably I might just play e4. Push forward, protect this pawn, looks good. Wrong! White is winning. White is winning if you play e4. Again, this position doesn't make any sense. Why is white winning? Well, bishop takes c8 now. And, you just lost the bishop for nothing. If you take the bishop back, then white plays queen to e6. And it's not looking very good for you. Attacking the bishop, attacking the rook. Your pawns are looking good. Not gonna lie, but they are a little bit stuck, and your queen is a little bit stuck in between your own pawns, and this pawn is going places. So, again, e4 kind of seems like straightforward, but wrong. And Bourdonnais again shows his class, not going for the most obvious moves that are going to lose. He first deals with that bishop problem. Remember, we don't have to retake the bishop on c8 if we take the bishop ourselves first. So bishop takes on d7, and now c takes d7. We have to be very careful. Look at this pawn. Bourdonnais saw, of course, that the pawn is going to d7 after the recapture, and of course he played it because he realized it looks scary, but in reality not scary at all. And now that we have dealt with that bishop threat, we can now play e4. You're like, wait a minute, what about queen c8? It does look quite scary, doesn't it? If rook takes, just takes, promotes, and wins. If I ignore it, then queen takes, bishop takes, and still promotes and wins. It looks quite scary. Yeah, it kind of does. But La Bourdonnais is like, none of that. I'm having none of that. I don't care. Bishop d8. Blocking. Just blocking. There isn't much you can do. So if queen takes, just rook takes without any problem whatsoever. And if rook c8, pinning the rook, and like, I'm gonna promote at some point. We're just gonna play queen g5, defending that rook. And this is not a big deal. This is all still fine. Even after rook takes f2, we've just got too much extra material. We've got a queen and a rook for 2 rooks, and we've got these monster pawns. It's minus 15 for black. So queen c8, bishop z8 did happen on the board, but it did not go the way I showed you. White did not capture here. They realized probably this is not going to work. McDonnell is not a bad player, to put it mildly, and they just, understood that the plan is a bit futile, and they retreated with the queen to c4, trying to put the queen a bit closer to the action. But with the rook not being on c2 anymore, but being on c3, we regain the possibility to play queen e1. Remember, it didn't work because the rook was on c2, and if e1 happened a couple of moves earlier, the rook on c2 would simply capture that f2 pawn in a variation I showed you before. Now it's impossible, and this is what La Bourdonnais played. Again, very good vision and understanding of the dependencies in the position. Now that the rook is no longer there, we can do it. This is just a massacre. I don't have any other ways of describing it. There is not much McDonnell can do anymore, really. He did fight till the end, of course. Rook to c1, trying to double up the rooks on the first rank, trying to shore up the position a little bit, but just d2. d2, this doesn't matter. You can capture the queen with either rook, if you so wish. Of course, I guess I don't have to explain to you, either capture is just going to lead to promotion and to eventual mate. So it's just oh, it's so nice. It's so nice to see so many pawns, and if you think that there couldn't be many more, you are wrong, because McDonnell hasn't resigned yet. Queen c5 now. This small threat, which is about the only threat that white can throw in black here, attacking that undefended rook on f8, and of course La Bourdonnais responded with rook g8. Not the only response, rook f7, rook f6 are also possible, but better to hide the rook altogether. It doesn't really matter anymore. Rook d1, very brave attempt by McDonnell there to block these pawns up. But McDonnell has 2 rooks, but La Bourdonnais has 3 pawns. Now e3, we're going closer and closer. This is just too much. Queen c3. I'm not sure what queen c3 is supposed to do. I don't think that McDonnell knew either. And a very, very simple finishing blow with queen takes d1, because it really doesn't matter anymore. After rook takes, we play the position in the thumbnail, if you recognize it. Bravo e2. Just look at this. This is amazing. This is what the dreams are made of. I'm speechless. There are 3 things you can watch forever: how the fire burns, how the water flows, and how these pawns are completely destroying McDonnell's chess career. An amazing game, and both players had a big part in it. I can only commend McDonnell so much. This game could have easily been a ball fest, but because he decided to go fighting and played c4, back then, a very, not solid, aggressive move, trying to create this counterplay. And this pawn did end up on the 7th rank. It did end up being more harmful, more dangerous than most of you anticipated. So bravo to McDonnell for sticking there for so long. But of course, a lot of the plaudits have to go to La Bourdonnais himself. Definitely the best player in the world in the 1830s. And it just goes to show how, even at that time, people were still capable of finding these brilliancies, these only moves in very, very sharp and tactical positions. And this is just amazing. Very romantic, very good game. Again, one of Kaspar's favorites, by the way. So yeah, if you just so happened to find this video useful, please like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitch. I stream Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Find me on chess.com. Join our Discord. All that good stuff. And I'm going to talk to you very soon. My favorite unintentional gambiters. I love you all. See ya in the next one.